cool. So as you can see, this week has been very slow. Makes sense from the perspective of how overextended we have been, considering also we've also tapped into the POI of reference that we had covered last week. But now based on the POI, right, just looking at internal structure, we know that we were obviously bullish coming into the POI. So low, high retracement, unwillingness, break, but then a liquidity grab, meaning that for the short term, right, this sign of optimism could have been, right, a reason to start to give you that bullish bias. Because in reality, what happened here, right, I wouldn't say that's a liquidity grab of the POI. I wouldn't even consider this a mitigation at all. I just consider this a move, right, which then created the momentum shown. The momentum shown is what's giving me clues as to why I would assume a bullish run. So because of that, right, although we did anticipate a potential retracement into, right, a discount, but not a very deep discount, which is where we ended up going, full inefficiency fill right here, right, this, right, then creates an intermediate break, right, in terms of the preliminary and the full structural range internally, right, but the preliminary range has been broken, right, and the unfortunate thing here is that although it did tap the H1 POI, we did not fully tap the M15 POI. So for me, this is a bit conflicting because I don't really have supporting details giving me what type of bias I should be, essentially going for. And also considering the fact that although our structural range is bullish and that never fully broke, right, I know that internally this is technically bullish, right, at least up until we reach these premium zones inside of the liquidity grab. So the liquidity grab, when we're looking at our zones now, right, especially within a smaller time frame, right, this is looking very corrective. When I'm seeing very corrective movement, right, then it's harder for me to anticipate, right, a bullish move, right, unless I have proper reasoning. But it's also, conflicting here because if I'm trying to catch a trade in terms of if I want to catch a bias from here to then reach, to reach liquidity, right, it's a pretty big trade. So I need obviously the confirmations to be shown. But when I have equal lows, the equal lows were taken, right, a sign of bearishness, right, but the sign of bearishness then leads into a bullish liquidity grab based on a potential POI, whether that be this or something else. Like it could probably be M30. But yeah, well, no matter, it doesn't matter that what matters here is that the fact that we came into, we wanted to be, bearish, because when we're looking at our internal range, you could see the bearish mitigation here. The bearish mitigation leading into the break, meaning order flow is to the downside as of the moment, and that inevitably changes direction. So when this happens, this gives me an inclination that we could be seeing a structural disruption based on this low, and then based on taking out this high. So now I need, a bullish transition. And one of the only POIs that would make sense to me is technically here, based on order flow continuation, 1 mitigation, 2 mitigation. So in order for me to continue a bullish bias, you need the transition here. If you don't have the transition here, then you can't assume a reversal, because all can happen here is you can reach a POI and continue lower, right? So pretty much we'll see how this rolls out throughout the call. But just based on how we have, how we have moved this week, right? I don't expect too much. Next week should be more interesting, but I really wouldn't be surprised if we, continue higher, especially if we get a strong reaction from this entire area and we don't break, right, the POI, we don't have the order flow disruption. As long as this invalidation is sustained, it would make sense to start maybe even seeing up here, right? Because we've already seen a reaction internally if we break this POI, right? If we break this POI and then go higher, right, then the reaction has already occurred. So this POI, I would need a bearish transition to start to go lower. So as of now, you have to assume a bullish nature, a bullish continuation, but we've been super corrective as well. So it's a bit conflicting because, like I said, right, we did challenge our structural range low, but then that led into a liquidity grab. So I can really, if I want to formulate a bias, I can only formulate, or I can only go based on a short-term, medium-term bias, right, which would be based on the reactions given within POIs, said POIs. Moving on to GU, right, this one continued, right, just like we had mentioned on Tuesday. I believe that was here, right? I pretty much showed you guys this, but it was very it was hard to take this position because of where, you know, price had reacted from, because it did not give you a strong mitigation and you're technically picking a high. So realistically, opportunities could have been here, but if we actually dive deeper, very choppy. No, not necessarily strong order flow per se, unless you're playing with limits. Because if you're playing with limits, then you're just going based on mitigations, which would be mitigation, right? And I believe this was the M30. Yep, M30 inefficiency, right? But you know that the R there would be relatively low. And even here you could see the continuation, right? POI where, right, you see the continuations occur. However, this is strong order flow. So the cool thing is that we have already shown a sign of potential reversal, and that inevitably failed. How do we know that failed? Well, because of the POI here, right? The M30 wick. M30 wick, right? But what does that mean internally? Internally, I know that that means that, oh shit, let me see if there's a POI of the M15. No, there was no POI, but what I'm basing this on, more importantly, right, we have a very significant low here, solidified low, because this is, after this is where the pullback began. So we came into that low, then inevitably came high, low, retracement, unwillingness, break, right? The break, solidified low, right? And with this push here, right, I know that we've broken structure, right? So I know that this is my solidified high in terms of the overall range, or, you know, the intermediate range, the medium term range. So once this mitigation has now occurred, right, and this is now solidified high based on the break of the previous low, I now know that this wanted to give me the willingness to go higher, but then inevitably fails, giving me a bearish bias. So when the bearish bias comes into play, right, I now know there's going to be two relative areas of interest in terms of continuation, which would be 1 and 2. So that pretty much gives you a setup for next week. Because if we're looking at this low, what are we mitigating exactly? Not necessarily anything, because if you want to say we're mitigating the wick has already been mitigated once, but there is still the 50%. However, for this 50% to give you a strong reaction, you have to break through these POIs. Right? If you break through these POIs based on this, it could be an internal liquidity grab, and that could shift your bias. But as of now, this mitigation is only beginning the pullback based on the data that is given. So that moves us on to AU. AU, interesting one. I didn't see any re-entries at all this week. As you can see, liquidity grab, but then there's a mitigation, but internally medium term, low, high, retracement, continuation. So you can't really assume the high here. Even if you want to assume it's a liquidity grab, it's not a full liquidity grab until this low is taken. So immediately after that, you can see the choppy nature. So not really much that is interesting, but we did cover the fact that we did reach, right, POI here. I mean, our target 1 here, and that we are potentially going to the second target that we had mentioned on Tuesday. And yeah, we should. I don't see any reason why we don't touch that. Don't see any reason. But yeah, this has been a very, very good move. And I know I did mention, you know, the cycle per se here, where it's actually resembling potential cycle. But you guys know I don't want to push that too much. But for the people that weren't on Zoom Tuesday, or last Friday, I believe. Where is it? It's basically this, but I'm looking for the stop charts one. Basically this, where from a Wyckoff perspective, I'm not necessarily wanting to focus on this, or this. What I'm wanting to focus on, right, is, actually, let me actually just do a box. We have bullish transition, right? And then whatever it is internally, strong order flow, which we then have the move, which then leads us to a bearish transition, which then leads us to bearish order flow, right? The point here is to note the transitions. The transitions are what's going to go in, it's what's going to give you, you know, those longer term biases. And especially with, you know, adding the fact that, you know, you add order flow to that, you add structure to that, right? So I'm not necessarily too, how do I say this? I don't necessarily care too much about supply demand. I care about transitions. I care about order flow, structure. I care about what's going to give me a trade and how to find that trade. But yeah, demand. That's why you don't really hear me say demand zones, supply zones, stuff like that. But cool. Does that make sense? Yeah, I hope that makes sense. I know there's not too many of you on today. But this one with EU, right? Choppy, very, very choppy. But I am bearish on this, just as I would assume that I would be more bullish on DXY because of, you know, the narrative built based on a liquidity grab, right? I am more bearish on this because, right, for one, I am, you know, disappointed that this ended up breaking even, but I am acknowledging the fact that liquidity was met. That liquidity, although wasn't met in terms of a mitigation perspective, right? Let me see if there's actually, yeah, there we go. This is what I'm looking for here. So this is what's dictating a potential bias, but it's not giving me the full information that I need to then, you know, create a bias based on that. So what I would create a bias based on would be the fact that we have mitigation, right? Potential mitigation of that, right? And then a potential mitigation of that here. But it's until the hand is shown, and you could even do this with the wick. What I cared to see is that this broke the low. Once this broke the low, it told me, right, that obviously we have a bearish move, which it's just considered a potential liquidity grab, but we did not break the high. But I honestly, if it wasn't for this data here, I would most likely assume that this move would have given you a new high. But because we then have pretty much no man's land here, right, and we have the final mitigation, which gives us a push down, right? I don't necessarily want to look for a buy unless I'm looking for a hedge, but I know that if I'm looking for a hedge, whether anywhere here, I know that if I'm looking for a buy here, I know I have to look for a sell here because it is a break of structure internally based on low unwillingness break. And now, right, even though we had a bullish reaction, the bullish reaction, what I'm paying attention to is willingness. And as you can see here, there's a break and then there is a mitigation, which led to, I believe, NFP this morning. But the NFP move, right, was short-lived because this then, I believe it met a inefficiency here. Yeah, it did. Right, inefficiency, which then led to a new lower low, But the only way to really capitalize on that was to follow internal order flow, which is, I'm pretty sure a couple of you did actually show this, via, right, narrative is dictated here, because this is now what creates the internal lower low, which breaks structure, which solidifies a liquidity grab. So from a conservative perspective, this makes sense. And from a conservative perspective, this makes sense. But these are just continuations. So if you're focusing on continuations, then as soon as that initial structure break occurs, then for one, you got to take partials, you got to close the position, either one. It just depends on how much you're willing to hold. Well, your answer is pretty self-explanatory. If you break the high of an SR, does that make it bullish? Well, does it make it bearish? No. Like, just listen to the question. If you break a bearish structural range, then what does that make it? Right? Yeah, I hope that makes sense. Something I'm noting here now too, right, is I didn't like how we didn't mitigate anything here, and we didn't even make it into a discount. Well, the full discounted POI, I'm sorry. So because this happened, I mean, this is already a solidified low, and I don't really see what is mitigating this. I don't see what is giving this the move to the upside. I don't see a reason either, because there really isn't no strong POI left. So as of now, because this is short-term bullish, it makes me really just want to stay back and take a step back and let this actually give me, you know, something to play off of. And that brings us back to DXY. Yeah, as you can see, right, just as we had mentioned, right, POI would have been there, invalidation would have been there, and as you can see, this is continuing because we did not get the bullish transition. So because that's the case, this could easily start to melt down. And with this daily closure today, yeah, we could really see that break of that that M15 that we talked about, and it could give us, you know, that bearish narrative. And let me see how this week is going to close too. Yeah, honestly, I would more so incline to bullishness based on that. But like I said, we need to wait to see how we react based on the structural range. Especially, like I said, this isn't mitigating anything, so we'll see. Cool. Does anybody have any studies they want to show? Yeah, I was pretty boring, if I'm being honest. Yeah. If I see choppy stuff like this in the morning, honestly, I don't even want to open my computer. Yeah, I don't see, you know, anything appealing. But I mean, this one has been melting, so this one must be bullish. Yeah. So choppy too. So choppy. And this one's still going. It'll probably even meet this today, maybe. What is that, 10, 20 pips, maybe? Too much news this week? I don't worry about that, bro, if I'm being honest. I don't worry too much about that. You don't see moves like you used to see back like 2-3 years ago. When NFP used to give you 100 pips, you don't see that anymore. But yeah, does anybody have any questions? Any questions? Anything you guys want to review? Cool, so we can end it off here. Yeah, pretty boring week if I'm being honest. I don't know yet. I mean, last year December was pretty good, and I skipped the entire month, and it was pretty good. So if you start seeing more choppiness, then I don't see a point in trading. I mean, let me see last year. Yeah, see, December gave you an entire bullish run up until mid-Feb. Yeah, you see, so I wouldn't say, like, I used to be super like I'm gonna stop trading because it's December, low liquidity, blah blah blah. But then once you learn that everything is already predetermined, then it really doesn't matter. If it's all predetermined anyways, it doesn't really matter if it's December. If there's a move, there's gonna be a move. Yeah, I did. Yeah, it was a year ago today. Which is yeah, December 2020. That was when we were fully short on EG. And look at this, in a whole year, this is all it's fucking given us. In a whole year, it's given us 600 pips. That's awful. That's shit. 760 pips in a year. That's shit. That's awful. For FX, no, look, let me see. December last year. Like basically here. In a whole year, this one gave you 1,000. Are you still holding? No. Nah, man, no. Do you often backtest? You understand that that these zooms are basically me backtesting? Providing a bias, calculating a bias, talking about previous biases? But do I sit down for 5 hours a day looking at charts? No, not anymore. That's how I burned myself out. I believe it was a year or 2 years ago. I don't remember. We literally just talked about December, bro. We literally just talked about it. I literally like 2 minutes ago. Yeah, burnout is awful, bro. And it's based on everything that I've looked into, I guess you could say there's ways to prevent it, but I don't see anything on how to work with it, you know? Because I don't know, burnout is such a weird thing. Like you don't feel like doing anything, you don't feel like, you just don't feel like it. Yeah, but sometimes the burnout will go through to everything in your life. Yeah. There's a bullish closure on bullish wick. Didn't even see this till now. Because I like to consider burnout to be like in the same relative realm as like depression or something like that. Obviously not extreme depression, but if you're depressed because of A, then it's gonna affect you while you're doing B and C and D. You know, just like if you're burnt out from A, it could affect you doing B, C, and D. You see what I mean? Because that's kind of what happened with me. Yeah, you see, yeah. But yeah, unless you guys have any more questions, we can probably end it off here. Cool, bro. I'll see you guys on Tuesday.